Welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week, the possibility of the resumption of international flights for Nigeria as more evacuees return to the country. Then we're taking a closer look at the disaster that happened last week in Lebanon as the people accuse the government of negligence. We'll be speaking to a Middle East expert, Professor Bassel Saluk. He's in Beirut. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. As usual, we begin with a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles.
French President Emmanuel Macron has called on world powers to put aside their differences and support the Lebanese people following the massive explosion that went off on Tuesday last week. Lebanon's debt-laden economy was already marred in crisis and reeling from the coronavirus pandemic before the port explosion, which killed 158 people. Foreign governments are, however, wary about writing blank checks to a government perceived by its own people to be deeply corrupt, and some are concerned about the influence of Iran through the Shiite group Hezbollah. The U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, was in Taiwan over the weekend as the highest-level U.S. official to visit in 4 decades, a trip condemned by China, which claims the island as its own, further irritating Sino-U.S. relations. Azar's trip is to strengthen economic and public health cooperation with Taiwan and support Taiwan's international role in fighting the pandemic. He is expected to sign a health cooperation memorandum of understanding with Taiwan's government and visit Taiwan's Center for Disease Control and meet with the president, Tsai Ing-wen. Saudi Arabia says it's cooperating with Chinese pharmaceutical companies on the 3rd phase of clinical trials of a COVID-19 vaccine. The cooperation is based on the agreement between the two countries against the COVID-19 pandemic, and the vaccine under trial has been tested in multiple medical institutions of different countries and proven effective and safe in the 1st and 2nd phases of trials. Saudi Arabia is one of the Middle East countries severely hit by the pandemic, where the number of new cases reported daily maintains at around 1,500, although the situation has tended to stabilize after peaking in May and June. Bells tolled on Sunday at the Canada Parliament building for the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki as the world remembers the World War II atomic bomb, which left over 75,000 dead and prompted Japan to surrender. The bells tolled at 11:02 a.m. local time, the exact time when Nagasaki was bombed. On August 9, 1945, U.S. B-29 warplane Bockscar dropped a bomb nicknamed Fat Man that killed more than 75,000 people. The bombing came just 2 days after the U.S. warplane Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima that obliterated the city with an estimated population of 350,000 people.
Welcome back. More Nigerians have been returning to the country via evacuation flights, just as the government plans to resume operations for international flights. On Thursday, the national coordinator of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, Sani Aliyu, said approvals have been given for aviation authorities to commence the process for resumption of international flight operations.
After 4 months of inactivity at the international airports, save for international flights, it appears Nigeria is ready to open up the country to international travel again. 2 weeks before, the Minister of Aviation, Mr. Hadi Sirika, had said international flights in and out of the country may resume before October, dismissing reports that a date has been set. He had clearly said then, via his Twitter handle, that NAMA had only issued a routine 90-day notice to airmen, otherwise known as NOTAM, and that, in liaison with Health, Foreign Affairs and PTF COVID-19, we will announce the agreed date regardless of the ban by Europe, UAE and others, maybe earlier than October.
Gentlemen of media.
By Thursday, he said the decision to resume flight operations was not purely an aviation problem, as it had to do with health, and that the PTF had set up a technical committee that would deliberate on the date that all the stakeholders in international air transport would be happy to start operations.
This is not purely an aviation function. It is all to do with our health, and it's so huge that it caused Mr. President in his wisdom to set up the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. And this is universal and global. And this is in the interest of the nation and its citizens. We in civil aviation want to open like yesterday. We are bleeding. We are sacking our workers. We are not paying salaries. You must move. You must fly from one point to another to pay for the airfare, for us to make money and remain in business and pay our salaries. So we really, really want to open. But we can't open alone. Within the space where we operate, within our area of operations, we've got all kinds of people in there in the airports. You've got immigration, you've got police, you've got customs, you've got civil defense, you've got everybody in there, port health, etc., etc. So the PTF Task Force COVID-19 had set up that technical committee to come up with this date where everybody is happy to start. If it is our own, we wouldn't want to have even closed the airports anyway. We are forced by this monster to close. So we will open as soon as one of us are happy.
He indicated that he understood the pain of Nigerians as the closure of the international airspace had separated families and friends, denied people access to hospitals and schools abroad, and denied them access to their businesses. Meanwhile, 322 Nigerian evacuees arrived at the Murtala Mohammed International Airport in Lagos from the Gatwick Airport, London, on Saturday. Earlier the same day, 87 Nigerians landed at the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja, and 311 Nigerians from the UAE arrived a couple of hours later in Abuja before proceeding to Lagos. There was also the arrival of 308 Nigerians in Abuja from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, before proceeding to Lagos to begin their 14-day self-isolation period as mandated by the NCDC and the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. More evacuation flights are being scheduled from the UK, the US, and Lebanon.
And now to Lebanon, where anti-government protests have been rife since the explosion that happened on Tuesday. Angry protesters calling for the downfall of the government, whom they blame for the explosion, have been facing off with security forces who try to control the situation.
The protests rumbled on in Beirut on Saturday into the night as demonstrators called for the downfall of the government and the political establishment in the wake of the catastrophic explosion. Protesters said their politicians should resign and be punished for negligence they say led to Tuesday's blast, the biggest ever to hit Beirut. At least 158 people were killed in the explosion, including the wife of the Dutch ambassador to Lebanon, Hedwig Waltmans-Mollier, who was injured in the explosion as she stood next to her husband, Ambassador Jan Waltmans, in the living room of their house in Beirut. More than 6,000 people were injured and more than 300,000 rendered homeless by the blast, compounding months of political and economic meltdown. One resident said he not only felt homeless, but countryless.
After I moved to Lebanon and I understood the country dynamics, I understood that I was countryless and on my own, and there was no government taking care of its people, unfortunately. And now on top of that, I feel homeless. Yes.
Earlier in the day, the protesters stormed government ministries and thrashed the offices of the Association of Lebanese Banks. Riot police fired tear gas at those trying to get to the parliament building, and shots were heard. One protester sitting outside the foreign ministry, which was also attacked by the protesters, said authority was now with the people and not the government, and called on the Lebanese army to join them. Already, changes have begun in government. The country's Kateb Party, a Christian group that opposes the government backed by the Iran-aligned Hezbollah, announced on Saturday the resignation of its 3 lawmakers from parliament. The announcement by party leader Sami Gemayel brings to 5 the number of MPs planning to step down in the wake of the disaster. Since the explosion, international support has increased, with the French President Emmanuel Macron the first international leader to visit the site of the explosion and meet with the government. Arab League chief Ahmed Aboulgate says he will seek to mobilize Arab efforts to provide support to Lebanon. He said this after a meeting with President Michel Aoun, and that the League was ready to assist the investigation into the blast. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will join a conference call with the Lebanese president and other world leaders on Sunday to discuss aid to Lebanon. The U.S. Agency for International Development on Friday said it will provide more than $15 million in assistance, including food aid for 50,000 people for 3 months. It said it had also asked the U.S. military to transport enough medical supplies and pharmaceuticals to support up to 60,000 people for 3 months.
This very difficult time. We have not seen anything.
President Aoun says an investigation into the explosion is looking at whether it was the result of external interference in addition to simple negligence or an accident. The Prime Minister and Presidency have said 2,750 tons of highly explosive ammonium nitrate, which is used in making fertilizers and bombs, have been stored for 6 years without safety measures at the port warehouse. Hezbollah's leader Saeed Hassan Nasrallah says the explosion is an exceptional event in Lebanon's modern history that requires unity and calm. He has already denied accusations that his Iran-backed movement has arms warehoused in Beirut port, backing investigation into the blast. Lebanon was a founding member of the United Nations in 1945 and is a member of the Arab League, the non-aligned movement, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, but it has been rocked by political, security, and economic crisis. When it became independent of France in 1943, it established a unique confessionalist form of government, where the major religious sects apportioned specific political powers. It initially enjoyed political and economic stability, which was shattered by the bloody Lebanese civil war from 1975 to 1990 between various political and sectarian factions. The war partially led to military occupation by Syria between 1975 to 2005 and Israel from 1985 to 2000. In 2005, the country's former Prime Minister, Rafiq Hariri, was assassinated in a car bomb explosion, and Syria was accused of being behind the attack, while Syria claimed it was Israel that was behind the attack. The Hariri assassination marked the beginning of a series of assassinations that resulted in the death of many prominent Lebanese figures. The UNSC resolution called for investigation into the assassination, and preliminary findings cited indications the assassination of Hariri was organized by Syrian and Lebanese intelligence services. But in October 2019, the country faced its first series of mass demonstrations triggered by planned taxes on gasoline, tobacco, and online phone calls, such as through WhatsApp. It quickly expanded into a countrywide condemnation of sectarian rule, stagnant economy, unemployment, endemic corruption in the public sector. Legislation is perceived to shield the ruling class from accountability, and failures from the government to provide basic services such as electricity, water, and sanitation. Lebanon soon entered a political crisis, with Prime Minister Saad Hariri tendering his resignation. Other politicians targeted by the protest have remained in power.
When we come back from the break, we'll be speaking to Middle East expert Professor Bassel Saluk on the impact of the blast in Lebanon. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're staying with our focus on the impact and effects of the huge explosion in Beirut, Lebanon. Joining us now is Middle East expert and associate professor of political science at the Lebanese American University in Beirut, Bassel Saluk. He joins us now from Beirut. Mr. Saluk, thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just begin with, your thoughts on that day of the blast. What did you see? What did you experience?
Well, I was at home and we felt the pressure of the blast. And then all of a sudden, we were all engulfed in dust. And so by the time we were trying to make sense of what was happening, we heard this powerful noise and the breaking of glass. The explosion was so big that I think every resident of Beirut actually thought that it was in their own building. And so the instinctive reaction is to check that everybody in the house is fine, and then to make try to locate it and make some damage assessment. And so when I jumped to the kitchen, where I could hear that there was some glass breaking and so on, that's when I saw the cloud of red smoke coming from the direction of the port. The concentration of the destruction is unbelievable.
When you see the pictures on the internet and some of the news media that's been showing what's been going on in Lebanon, you see almost half of Beirut has been destroyed by this huge explosion, and the government says it wants to investigate. What you make of this, despite the fact that the government had indeed been warned about this stockpile near the port?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is what's making it so difficult for Lebanese to come to grips with what has happened, and it underscores their lack of trust in state institutions. This blast symbolized the total failure of the Lebanese state vis-a-vis their citizens, its total corruption, and in many ways, it has a feeling of a knockout blow for the country, coming after a tremendous economic and financial crisis that the country is experiencing.
Yeah, indeed, a pretty turbulent history Lebanon has had. But then again, a lesson in governance here following the impact of wars, political security, and economic instability. People of Lebanon are asking that all the political leaders, those in government right now, resign. They even said that much to French President Emmanuel Macron when he visited the site of the explosion. Would now be the best time for a fresh start politically for Lebanon?
I think, yeah, I mean, you've captured the dilemma fantastically. I think this is where we are now. There is a part of the society, and we saw this beginning in 17 October and the popular uprisings of 17 October. A big chunk of society simply does not accept the existing political system and the existing political elite in the country. They have lost trust in them. They believe that they are to be blamed for the economic, environmental, security situation in the country. And they simply do not believe that they can deliver any kind of genuine reforms, whether at the political level or at the economic, social, and environmental level. Now, President Macron's trip the other day seemed to suggest that what he, and I would assume he is speaking on behalf of others in the international community, is trying to push for is some kind of a national unity cabinet, or a cabinet that would have the semblance of a national unity cabinet, but one that would be committed to enforcing genuine economic and political reform. and that this is a precondition for any kind of financial help from the international community.
Do the people of Lebanon feel, looking at the past and, all of these factors, the war in Syria, the tensions with Israel and so on, do they sort of blame the international community for what's going on in Lebanon today? And is there the possibility of a healing process beginning in Lebanon as a result of this huge explosion that sort of united the country for the first time, I would say, in a pretty long time?
A big part of what happened is a result of the existence of this incredible amount of ammonium nitrate in the heart of Beirut. And I think this is why a lot of Lebanese are simply angry at what they consider to be a useless political establishment and a useless state that simply cannot undertake the minimal in terms of security towards its population. The problem, and this comes to the issue you were talking about, is that, alas, the Lebanese are still divided on this. As I said, some of them see that this is the opportunity for a complete and clean break with the sectarian political system. But there are others, the supporters of existing and well-entrenched political parties who do not want a clean break with the sectarian system, who look at that system as a source of economic, political, ideological benefits. And this has, tragically, if you like, made the agony in this present moment even more severe, because I've heard some things that I never thought Lebanese would say to each other at this moment of agony. And sometimes I wish that the Lebanese love each other and respect each other as much as outside powers seem to love us and respect us.
The US President Donald Trump, reacting to the explosion at first, said this was an attack on Lebanon. Some quarters also share the same views, and I think it's possibly why the government has decided to investigate, what happened on Tuesday. Do you think that by any chance the US president could be right in the end? This was triggered by some interested party in Lebanon's crisis?
Everything is possible. I'm not in a position where I can say anything definitive about this issue, because we really need to know all the facts. But we do know as Lebanese citizens that big chunks of the country, big parts of the country, big parts of the public sector are really colonies for the different sectarian political actors, which means that we really cannot talk about state supervision and state control over all of the country. And we also know that Lebanon is a country that is penetrated by all kinds of intelligence agencies. And so this is what makes it so difficult for the Lebanese, and it will make it more difficult for the Lebanese to accept any official version of what has happened. And I think that's why a lot of them are insisting not on an international investigation, but some kind of involvement.
Finally, Professor, what would be the way forward for Lebanon at this point, and how can it use all of the international support right now to its advantage?
I think the only way forward now is for the Lebanese politicians, but also those who have led this 17 October uprising, to come together in some kind of a dialogue, to agree on a roadmap for the future, one that will contain clear political reforms and economic reforms, and to link these to a definitive timetable, and to make any kind of IMF, World Bank supervised financial aid from the outside to hinged on the implementation of these reforms.
Professor Saluk, thanks again for joining us on Diplomatic Channel. We appreciate your thoughts. We pray for the safety of you and yours, and do stay well and be safe.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
We've come to the end of the program this week. You can watch it again on the Channels TV website at channelstv.com. Go to Programs, look for Diplomatic Channel and click. And a reminder here that Channels Television has moved on the DSTV platform to Channel 420 and Channel 48 on the GoTV platform. Thanks again for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.